We had instances, I spoke at one debate afterwards to two Muslims, and the one guy started manifest demonically. Now, I knew it was a demon. His friend looked at him and it's like, this guy doesn't have epilepsy. And I said, yes, that's a demon. And this guy's eyes was this big. And I turned to his friend and I said, I can pray for you in the name of Jesus, and Jesus can set you free.
Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living, which would imply an examined life is worth living. C.S. Lewis said, good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered. We live in a world full of bad ideas, and ideas have consequences. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you have not already, like, subscribe, and share this podcast with family and friends. A show where we examine life, contend with philosophies, ideas, and their consequences on today's culture. I am Rainer Thermal, and this is Hey Culture. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Hey Culture. This is the 15th episode of today, and it also concludes our mini-series on worldviews that we based upon James Sire's book, Universe Next Door. On today's episode, to speak on the worldview of Islam, we have Rudolph Boshoff. According to John Grobe, who is my employer, he is one of the foremost evangelists to Muslims in our country, in South Africa, so the perfect person to speak on a topic. Rudolph, welcome.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be with you guys.
Thanks. No, we appreciate you a lot. Just to introduce our viewers as to who you are, Pastor Rudolph has been working in different denominations and church settings for the last 24 years. He was preaching, teaching, and planting churches throughout South Africa. His ministry focuses on equipping the church to defend the faith and articulate its beliefs. It has three streams: apologetics, theology, and Christian spirituality. Pastor Rudolph has also been actively debating scholars in numerous moderated debates and have been involved in Muslim ministry and cult evangelism for the last 14 years. He debated scholars from all over the world. In addition, Pastor Rudolph has completed various accredited qualifications in theology and psychology and had the opportunity to facilitate conversations with various scholars and church leaders for the South African Theological Seminary, or better known as SATS. Pastor Rudolph also taught theology at Rhema Bible College in Randburg from 2014 and was the dean until December 2022. Pastor Rudolph is a member of the Global Network of Evangelists. Pastor Rudolph has been married to his beautiful wife, Candace Boshoff, for the last 16 years, who is active in ministry with him. They have a beautiful baby called Jay and three dogs, Mojo, Crunchy, and Bella. Pastor Rudolph, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Welcome on the show.
It's an absolute pleasure, man. It's always wonderful to speak about the things of God. And like I said, as long as we've got breath, we should do this more often. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate you taking time to allow me to speak to the audience.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And today we're going to speak on Islam, but seeing as you are a bit of an expert in cult evangelism, I think we can look into the future, maybe do an episode on cults if you would like. But
that'll be fantastic. Especially in South Africa, we've got very unique cults, right? I spoke to Prof. Sturker once, and I asked him just roughly. I thought he won't give me a number, but I said to him, "Hey, Prof. Inc., in South Africa, how many cults do we have?" And he, without losing a breath, he said close to 1,000. And I was shocked. I was like, "What?" I thought it was like 15 max, but apparently there's a lot of cults. And I think for us as the church, I think we need to, I shouldn't say experts in every field, but wherever you find yourself, find an opportunity to minister to groups that are outside of orthodoxy. The unfortunate thing is that churches today are not focused outward. We're very much focused inwardly, which means that we love to produce church members. And it's almost vicarious to discipleship, right? A while back, I just finished the book of Dallas Willard that's called The Greater Mission, where he speaks on the intention and the heart of the Christian is not just to form community inwardly, but to do what Jesus required for us to do, and that's to go into all of the world. So I'm very passionate about allowing members to grow up, because I think large part what is a problem in our churches is we've got insecure leaders that don't want people to extend the reach beyond what they're doing as pastors, maybe. But then we also have people that do things and they have not really prayed and allowed God to awaken I should say, a desire in their heart to reach out to others. Something that's quite concerning as well is that part and parcel of what it meant to be a Christian about 100 years ago. I just recently read a book of Charles Spurgeon, and the title of the book is Soul Winning, believe it or not. But the passion, and I was so shocked whilst I was reading this book at the assumptions Spurgeon makes. And let me give you an example. It's almost a given that a Christian is out there witnessing, ministering, searching, and being very direct, but also very intentional about his or her faith wherever God has placed them. So the context where the Christian find themselves in almost inevitably allow for them to become a preacher to that context. So wherever you find yourself, if it's your family, you're raising 10 children, maybe that's the context. That's your church. If you find yourself working for a boss, my wife currently works for individuals that are Mormon. And I always remind her and say, remember, Jesus placed you there for a reason. And I need to say that she really shines her light sterlingly. But wherever you find yourself, the sad reality is that I'm doing a debate in October, right, in Centurion. And just to tell you the funny story, there's a church, and next to the church is a mosque. So this church really wants to reach out to their neighbors. So I said, well, I've got this Muslim friend of mine, and if you want to, why don't we have a conversation where we get together, we break the wall down. I don't know what they're going to do, but we have a conversation. We sit together as two communities and we just speak. It doesn't have to be a debate. We just have a conversation, and I've done quite a few with this friend of mine, Ahmed Bandor, where we speak on why he is a Muslim and why I'm a Christian. And then we open it up for panel discussion where the Christians can ask a Muslim, okay, but what do you do about this or that? And what's your worldview? And what's your definition of prayer? And why do you pray the way you do? And why do you sing in the morning over loudspeakers? And all these different weird things. And then the Muslims can turn on the Christians and then ask questions. And let me say to you, every time we get together in a setting where Christians have the opportunity to ask questions to Muslims, they are very well informed as to what they need to ask. Christians are not that well informed because we are not focused outwardly. And so, yeah, it is a challenge. There's a challenge to reach out. It is a challenge, especially in our country, to make sure that we bear good witness to what we believe.
How did you get involved specifically in Muslim evangelism?
That's a very interesting story. I usually it's traumatic experiences, I would say, that brings us to a place where we reevaluate what we believe and ask questions surrounding what we do. And I planted a church in the west of Johannesburg next to Lenasia, and there was a young guy in my church. Whilst I just started at the church, he was marrying a Muslima. He was marrying a Muslim lady. And one of the prerequisites for him to marry this Muslim lady was that he should become a Muslim. And so his mom phoned me. I was the pastor of a church, just took the church over. Me and my wife, we were going to this church, and we were starting basically this church from scratch. And one of these members that I had in this church, the lady phoned me and said to me, listen, this son of mine is reverting to Islam, and he is basically becoming a Muslim for the sake of marrying this lady. Can you talk to him? So I said, no problem. And I said to my wife, still I can remember the night before I left, I said, I'm just going to go take my Bible with, didn't even know it was needed, and just go have a good conversation with this guy and say, hey man, if you're a Christian and you're a Muslim, obviously there are certain elements in Christianity and Islam which is totally incompatible, and don't let them sway you and lie to you, etc., etc. Anyway, I arrived there, and this young man started speaking to me. And as we were sitting, I can remember he sat with a booklet, and he had this booklet open, and he asked me questions from this booklet. And he asked me questions that stumped me. Questions on 2 Samuel, and why is there a chronological difference in 2 Samuel and 1 Corinthians when it speaks to, for instance, about the amount of horses that Solomon possessed. Now those things are not bearing upon what we believe about God and our worldview, but ultimately what he was trying to do is to show that the text in and of itself cannot be reliable, and therefore, because the Quran is reliable, that is probably the truth. So I'll be very fair and very open and honest about it if I say I was totally ill-equipped. I didn't know what he was talking about. I never knew there was a discrepancy. The footnotes of my beautiful devotional Bible that I took with had nothing about anything of that sort. And that was not the only question he asked. He asked questions into the New Testament, asked questions pertaining to salvation, the death of Jesus on the cross, and I didn't have answers. And when I left that night, he was definitely not moved at all. In actual fact, he was stirred to become a Muslim because of my ineptness to actually answer questions. And I'm just saying this very honestly and openly. I've been through seminary. I've made sure to do all the work in seminary. I can remember apologetics, and especially Islam was one of the courses we did in first year. I'll be honest, we did it so quickly amongst other religious worldviews that there was no way for me to memorize or even make sure that what I believe was in actual fact good or solemn. And so I was reminded of a scripture in 2 Samuel 12:14. The words I used where it says, by that specific deed, I've given occasion to the enemies of Yahweh to blaspheme. And I was vexed in my heart. I was really vexed in my heart because I really wanted to be sure, and I really wanted to make sure that I speak to this young man and there's a good outcome where I can go to his mom and say, guess what? She's becoming a Christian, on the other side, and he's staying a Christian. And he didn't. He became a Muslim. And so it haunted me for a while. And then I realized, hey, if I'm gonna minister in Lenasia, which is my context where I've planted my church, I better need to know what Muslims believe. And so the first thing I did is I contacted a friend of mine. There was actually the lecturer we had in seminary was Dr. Jan Carstens. Contacted somebody that knew him, realized that he's not available, but this individual said to me, oh, you're in Lenasia. Hey, man, contact John Gilchrist. So I said, John who? And he said, John Gilchrist. So I said, oh, okay. And so I contacted John and I explained to him what happened. And, he said to me, what are you doing on Wednesday night? So I said, no, Wednesday night we've got prayer. He said to me, what do you do on Thursday night? So I said, no, Thursday night we can do something. Friday night we've got youth. So Thursday night I went off and I walked with John and another gentleman, and we just knocked on doors. Well, they knocked on the doors, and they would go from house to house and minister to Muslims. And I'll be honest with you, Raina, at that stage, I felt in my heart, my sentiment towards Muslim and the Muslim world was they can all go to hell. They're captivated by a lie. Wonderful pastoral heart, isn't it? They willfully deceived, and therefore they can all go to hell. That was, if I say in shame, that was my sentiment. I'm not exaggerating. That's what I felt. And so I went out with him, and there was this lady in a burqa, and her husband came down. They were lovely. They were warm. John spoke to her, presented the gospel, spoke to the husband. They gave a few questions, and I can't remember the exact conversation, but something just stirred in my heart. It's almost like a seed planted. And I left and I went home and said to John, thank you very much. This is not for me. And sat at church and realized that the bigger picture of us ministering to the world, us transcending our context, where do I buy my groceries? Where do I buy everything around the house that I need? I buy it from Muslims. And here I'm confronted with, okay, I'm a pastor. I desire to see the community transformed, but I don't know how to speak the language of the people that I'm ministering to. So to make a long story short, I would say God changed my heart from day to night. I suddenly became a bit of a zealot and absorbed everything John wrote and everything John did. I irritated him. I was by his house every weekend. During the week as well, we really enjoyed each other's company. I edited his works and he wrote books, so it worked pretty well. But there was a relationship that grew, and out of that relationship, a desire to see Muslims come to Jesus. And in my context, which at that stage was vastly Muslim, I made sure to immerse myself, walk with, and ask John a lot of questions. And I thank God for that time, that journey. Then there was a debate in Potchefstroom with Dr. Michael Lecona and Yusuf Ismail. Went to the debate, met with Dr. Lecona afterwards. I knew Yusuf Ismail, knew his wife Adila very well. I knew Bashir Vania. I know so many Muslims it would scare you, but just really went to the households of some of these individual Muslims. And if I go to Bashir's house in Lenasia, Nasima will make me samosas and something spicy to eat because I love spicy food. And I'll go sit like a son in their house, and they accept me as such. So the relationship's very different. And obviously their desire is for me to come to truth, which for them is Islam. But my ultimate desire is for them to experience the beauty and the absolute sacredness of the cross, which is absent in their religion. So yes, that is a very short way to look at why I got involved. And that snowballed. Somebody invited me, said to me, would you like to have a discussion on the doctrine of the Trinity? At that stage, I was teaching at a seminary, and I thought, as part of the seminary, I don't want seminarians to leave uninformed. So what I would do in the curriculum is I would bring in experts on specific religions as I could, and we would have debates in class. So the whole semester, you will have a class on Islam, who Muhammad was, what Muslims believe, what their worldview was, what it means when we speak on Islamic theism. And then in the end, whatever question emerged, the students usually asked the question. We would debate the topic. So it was or Jesus in the Quran and the Bible, or it was Allah versus Yahweh, or it was sin and salvation in Christianity and Islam. Whatever the students wanted to discuss, we made sure to have a debate with a very eloquent and very educated Muslim. And I tell you, it transformed the way the students thought of the subject material, because they had to apply it, right? In the end, I would sit them down and they had to speak to the Muslim, and they had to give answers, and they had to account for what they believed in, etc., etc. Totally transformed the way we look at our curricula, and also our pedagogy just radically changed. Still for it though. I like that way of teaching. I like that way of introducing people to Islam. So if you ever go to me to a stadium and we do a debate, I will give you an opportunity to speak and to state your case as well, because that's the best way to learn, is to be in that environment and to speak to them.
Yeah, and I can relate to it, to the fact that teaching style is effective. Is when I was second year, that was the first time I met you. When I was second year, you and John Gilchrist together came to teach us back then it was still the Bible College's Living Word, and you came to teach us on Islam. And I remember that I think the last day of you guys teaching, it was the Friday, you had John and I can't remember the Muslim guy's name.
Mohammed Kuvadia.
Yeah, you had them debating, but then afterwards you had us asking questions from our chairs to both of them. Yeah. And that was because I remember Muhammad was prepared to answer most of the things that we asked, and that it kind of gives you that bit of a reality check that okay, no, I need to learn. So afterwards I bought a bunch of John Gilchrist's books.
Awesome.
But yeah, but I can relate to the fact that teaching method of you that works. That definitely works.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe it's also good just to say to the listening audience, it also creates an opportunity for the communities to come together. And in South Africa specifically, we've got a heritage which was built by people like John Gilchrist and the late Ahmed Didat. Even though his arguments were rancid, the one thing I really appreciated is the fact that he reached out to Christians to talk. And so we've got this legacy of debate in our country and our constitution, and it's something that we want to preserve. That's why I'll just say this outright, there's certain speakers out there that we will never invite to come debate in South Africa, because they don't want to debate Islam. They want to decimate Muslims. And so there's a huge difference between a debate, a discussion, making good points, and playing the man and vindicating your arguments by loving them the way Jesus does, according to 2 Timothy 2. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of what we see out in the world today that is popular, young men like to fight, young men like to see controversial arguments, insults, and that's what we see surrounding Muslim evangelism in the world that's popularized all over the world, especially from America, is, that vilification. And, I always say to people, a good place to start a conversation of Muslims is not to say, what do you think about Muhammad being a pedophile and consummating the marriage of Aisha when she was 9 years old? Not a good place to start a conversation if you want to win the Muslim to Jesus, because they're immediately offended. They immediately off the cuff say, oh, this guy's just in for the fight, and they'll give it back to you, So yeah, for me personally, I encourage people, the people I debate, like I said, for instance, with Bashir, even with Yusuf Ismail, his wife, that is close to us here in KwaZulu-Natal, they're personal friends. I've really befriended them, and I really respect them. These guys are excellent in their everyday life and what they do. Yusuf is a lawyer. Bashir is retired. But I can go sit in his house with his son, Lukman, and like I said, eat a meal and, just feel at home because I love them. I really love them. And God, that's one thing I need to say, is God changed my heart from that guy that said they can all go to hell to an incredible, deep infatuation and love for these people. Muslims in South Africa especially are not, they're not rude. The ones I deal with, they're very open, very friendly, very willing to talk, very willing to listen, very willing to speak to any Christian that will come their way. And it's an opportunity we've got. We've got a very good history of conversation taking place. And, like I said, wherever you find yourself, whatever context you are in, I had a guy the other day put a ticket through my gate, and he's a Jehovah's Witness. And I had the opportunity to befriend him and said to him, come back and let's talk and come tell me what you believe. He spoke immediately about eschatology. Now, my eschatological perspective is not a popular one. I'm not a futurist, so I'm a partial preterist. So that really throws the salad out there. But I love eschatology. I used to teach it, man, and I would give him books, how to read the book of Michael Gorman's book on Revelation, how to read it in context, and because I really care for this guy, I really want to love him, I really want to serve him with the gospel. I want to give him no excuse when he gets in front of Jesus one day to say, nobody told me, Lord. I want to make sure that he's totally saturated with truth, but in such a loving way that the day he decides to follow Jesus as Lord and Savior, that I'm involved, that he can say, there's part of that journey that you've shared that actually allowed for me to follow Jesus. And I pray for him. He's in trouble because I'm praying for him. Prayer is something we add to our apologetic and polemical witness. And I say to students, if you don't pray for the person that you're ministering to or the audience you're ministering to, don't do what you're doing. If there's a true concern, if there's a true vexing of the heart before the Lord for the lost, I believe God will move mountains. And we've seen it. We've seen weird things and we've seen good things. Brian Marion and myself ministered in one setting, and he was punched in the mouth by a Muslim. And I can remember he turned around to the audience and he used it as a witness. He used it. He said, is this what your religion taught you? And he used this as an opportunity to speak to Muslims. We had instances, I spoke at one debate afterwards to two Muslims, and the one guy started manifest demonically. Now, I knew it was a demon. His friend looked at him and it's like, this guy doesn't have epilepsy. And I said, yes, that's a demon. And this guy's eyes was this big. And I turned to his friend and I said, I can pray for you in the name of Jesus, and Jesus can set you free if you want me to. And he said, no. And I left him. Anyway, that's maybe another story. And then I spoke to a Muslim as well. And I used to drink coffee with him once a week. Every time I drove through Benoni, he said to me, if you drive through Benoni and you didn't drink coffee with me, you'll be in trouble. And I took him at his word. So every time I would drive through Benoni on the way to Springs or wherever I would go in Johannesburg, I would go drink coffee with this individual. And one day I was sitting with him in Wimpy and we were drinking coffee, and I can't remember the conversation, right? If you ask me today, what you guys speak on, I can't remember. We used to speak on salvation and the person and work of Jesus Christ, and how the Old Testament fits into the to what Muslims profess, but it needs to lean on the Christian Bible to make certain elements of the Quran known, like Jesus' sinfulness, sinlessness. Sorry, Jesus' exclusive sinlessness, the virgin birth. The Quran mentioned these two things, but it doesn't tell us why. You have to look at the Christian scriptures to make it known. So I spoke to him about that and a few other things. And the one day we sat down, we drank coffee, and he pushed his cup forward and he started weeping and he said to me, I believe what you're saying. And I can't remember what I said because I was totally blown away. And the Holy Spirit just convicted him of his sin and his need for a savior. And he surrendered his life to Jesus. And we had to move him on the same day, which is a big challenge, but I had friends that could help with that. So there's instances where you speak to Muslims and you're disheartened. I had a recent discussion in Durban in a huge center with an internationally well-known Muslim by the name of Hamza Tsotsis. And we actually spoke on which concept of God is the most loving, Christians or Muslims. And he had weird arguments that he would throw out. I actually asked for a copy of the debate, but they didn't send it. And all I did is I said, okay, I won't explain my argument. I won't bore the audience with that. But my basic argument was, because of the closeness and the incarnation of Jesus Christ and his work on the cross, we've got assurance that God loves us, not just nominally, but he truly loves us. And for that love to exist, there needs to be something relatable, which is called personal or personhood. And I work from a personalist metaphysic, and I track through what is necessary for this relationship to live and for this relationship to be vindicated. And I'll be honest, while I was speaking, he was not receptive. He was quite he was quite animated, and in a way, tried to belittle the work of God and the person of Jesus Christ, and that vexes my heart. He can become personal. He can say I'm ugly. He can say I'm fat. It doesn't bother me. It really doesn't. But vexes my heart when somebody stands in front of an audience and he denies the work and person of Jesus Christ. It just vexes me because they'll be eternally lost. So that vexed me. So you have good experiences sometimes. Sometimes you leave an audience and you think to yourself, Lord, did I say something that was worthwhile? But that's not your job. Your job is to deliver the message. And I believe that the Holy Spirit will do the work. As Paul said, some plants, some water, but God gives the growth. And yeah, so I'll stop there so I don't mumble all the time.
Amen. Yeah, before I get into the next question, I think what if the audience can take anything away from today is to kind of learn from your example. I think everything you've explained and your heart attitude towards Muslims is we can deal with the ideas of Islam, but towards the people is, I think that's what it gets down to when Paul speaks in the book of Ephesians to speak truth in love. And also when we get to that famous apologetics verse 1 Peter 3 verse 15, when Peter says, yes, we always be ready to give an answer for the hope that's within you, but he ends it with do it with gentleness and respect. And I think everything you've just explained, it kind of personifies exactly what the apostles meant by that. So if anyone can learn something from today's episode, is to really love the people that they are ministering to in the way that Jesus would.
I agree. Amen.
And then you mentioned earlier that Christians are ill-equipped or not just ill-equipped, but they don't really know much about Islam. And that Muslims know more about Christianity than Christians know about Islam. Maybe we can go into a couple of questions as to what Islam is. So to start us off, would you give us a short history as to the origin of this religion?
Yeah, and let me just say that if you're looking for good resources and you don't have any, I've got a few things on PDF, a few books. So afterwards, if you guys want to email me, I'll send my email to Rainer for the ministry, and I'm more than willing to share those resources for you guys. If you look for a brief history of Islam, Islam originated in the early 7th century in Mecca, which is modern-day Saudi Arabia. There's an individual by the name of Muhammad, and Muslims believe that Muhammad um, had a selection. He was the elect prophet from God to bring and to restore the original message of Islam to humanity. That original message is obviously that there is one God amongst all these numerous gods that Muhammad found himself amongst, and he is the final prophet sent by God. Obviously, after that, he also believed that he received the revelation over about a period of 23 years. And the Quran was a muhaymin. It was the restoration of the original message of the intention of God that was entrusted to Muhammad. It's actually quite interesting if you read the origin stories of this prophet, though. He was in the Arabian Peninsula, um, and he would go into a cave and he would meditate, as would be the practice of some of the individuals that would go looking for a revelation or to be closer to the divine. And he went into this cave experience at the cave of Hira, and basically there was this angel. Um, the angel is later stipulated as a lot of sources don't say the angel's name, either traditional sources, but later it was believed to be the angel Gabriel. Muslims will say the angel Jibril. And Jibril would take Muhammad and would squeeze the life out of him until his lips became blue and say to him, recite, Iqra. And Muhammad would say, I can't, because I cannot read nor can I write. So it happened to Muhammad, and he got a great fright. He actually went back to his wife Khadija at this stage and said to her, because Muslims believed in a way that if you received any form of revelation or recitation or anything poetic, it was usually through the influence of the demonic. So Muhammad's first initial response, and this is found in all the earlier sources of Islam, was to believe that he was demon possessed. And so his wife, Khadija, basically took him to her uncle, and her uncle was called Waraka. And he was a Chaldean heretic Christian. And he convinced Muhammad that Muhammad was in actual fact a prophet when he heard that the angel visited him and when he received the revelation. So interestingly enough, that's why the earliest Christian community that dealt with Islam, I'm talking about John of Damascus, talking about Al-Kindi and some of these early Christians that dealt with Islam, they believed Islam was a early Christian heresy because of the vindication and also the fact that Muhammad took from the Bible certain stories and he would build his own revelation. But that is very shorthand what we have when we look at the story of this prophet.
Okay, thank you very much for that. What is the Islamic view on truth? In other words, what is their epistemology? How do they think, do we know truth?
Yeah, it's very interesting because, like us, Islam obviously based their epistemology on the revelation of the Quran. I just recently read a book where the Muslim makes an incredible case for reason, and then obviously there's also a place for experience. That being said, we need to say that when we speak about revelation, reason, and experience, which is often the three things Muslims refer to, there's almost the assumption that the Quran in and of itself is God's final revelation. And like I said, God's constituted revelation. So if they read the Bible, for instance, whatever does not fit with what is revealed as truth in the Quran is rejected. So the Quran is that which guides essentially what they believe about the truth, even what we find in the Christian scriptures. So that is the foundational understanding of where they deduce truth from. When it comes to reason, they do believe that certain individuals have been guided or have been given the right to understand the truth of Allah, and this relates back to one of the pillars of Islam. In actual fact, is the belief. There's this essential belief in what is known as the divine decree. Well, it's not a pillar; it's a divine. It's one of their major beliefs. And so what they would say is, well, if you look at the divine decree, Allah have decreed by his will, and they call this qadr. He's decreed by his will who is basically the elect, who is proportioned certain knowledge to, and who is given this knowledge. So reason is not the investigative mind that is in pursuit of knowledge. No, for the Muslim, reason is the ability of God to attune man to his already established truth, which is obviously the Quran. And I would even go as far as to say, with revelation, reason, and experience, how did they deduce experience? They look at the life of the Prophet. So it's very important to understand, if you speak to Muslims, the way they deduce the understanding of God's message and the way to live, it's very much based on the earliest sources about the Prophet of Islam. So all of the hadith, all of the sunnah of the Prophet, all of the sirat literature that speaks authoritatively of what Muhammad decreed and what Muhammad lived, these things are seen as that which establishes basically their epistemology and their belief. But the Quran constitutes everything. They believe that the Prophet does not contradict the Quran. But like I said, reason in Islam, it's called aql, and the understanding of Allah's message through a way of revelation and subordinating yourself to that revelation is key. And like I said, the Prophet is also essential if you look at the epistemology.
Okay, that is so. So the books like the Hadith and so that just for the audience, those books are separate from the Quran.
That's correct. Yeah, these books
Okay.
have been written quite late after the Quran. And the interesting thing is that if you look at these books, there's a lot of interesting facts about these books. Okay, there's a lot of people that believe that if you look at these books, you can see an adaptation or you can see a change in this book. So there's a lot of people that say, no, there's a chain of narration that tell us these stories about the Prophet, and they can trace some of these chains of narration. Those that are deemed absolutely authoritative are, they call it, those hadith, they're called Sahih, Sahih, Sahih. So Sahih simply means sound. So there was a dependable reporter that truthfully spoke about the Prophet, accounting for the narrative, which is absolutely faultless. That is a Sahih. Then there's a secondary standard, which is called Hassan, which is approved, but they, somebody could have had a weak memory or contradict somebody else. That would be a son. Then there's a third level of hadith which speaks of the Prophet, and that is da'af or da'if, D-A-I-F, da'if. And da'if hadith is simply weak hadith. So there's no sequence of reporters. There's nobody that actually could speak authoritatively about a specific story. And then there's another level. I won't bore the audience, but it's called mutawatir hadith, meaning these hadith are contentious.
Meaning
that
there are questions raised about it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the questions rate. As far as I remember, the mutawatir hadith is simply it's seen as quite authoritative because it's taken directly from Muhammad's partners and some of his companions. So, but those standards are usually quoted when they speak of specific hadith. And then there's hadith that's very famous. They've got I can't remember the exact word again. It's move. I think it's I can't remember now. But there's different levels of hadith. That's basically the point where they deduce the story and the authority of the story of Muhammad from. And I've got most of them. If you want to read them, I've got all of Sahih Bukhari and Ibn Dawood and all the rest there. I've read through most of them, and it's fascinating if you read the life of the Prophet. Also fascinating to see that there's a lot of scholars these days. Robert Spencer, Dr. Who's just in South Africa now, Jay Smith, and a few others which dispute that the historical person of Muhammad actually existed. A lot of people believe that the historical person of Muhammad was a construction in the late centuries by different authors, where they took stories of these different Muhammads, and they put it together and they made up this one story of Muhammad. Very interesting. Yeah, so it's also important to reckon and to see that there's people that contend for that. Made famous by Patricia Kroener, who passed away a few years back. She wrote a book called Hagarism with I can't remember the gentleman's name, but his surname's Cook, Cook. And they basically look at the origins of Islam and call to dispute exactly what we see very early on. And there's 3 streams today that basically look at critically at the person of Muhammad, where this all happened. A lot of people believe that it happened way more up towards Petra. And the place that the Quran is describing is not the Arabian Peninsula as far low as we see, but it's rather up there, because there's the date trees and the palm trees and the olive trees.
Petra, like an Edom.
Yes, and Edom.
Petra and Edom, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of people believe that the actual story where we are told Muhammad dwelled is not in actual fact where he dwelled. And if you read some of the scholarly work on that, it's pretty convincing, I must say. It won't change the fact that Muhammad existed if you change the geographical location of where it took place. But it would definitely be interesting because, currently people are circling this little thing called the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia, and they believe that that's where God gave Muhammad this venerated black stone. And they kiss it because it was given by the Prophet to venerate. And so they circle the stone, and history tells us that it might not have been there. So very interesting story. I don't want to detract from it. Yeah,
that is interesting. What is Islam's view on, or what is Islam's ultimate reality?
Yeah, it's very interesting because their ultimate reality is obviously Allah. They believe, like us, that ultimate reality is found in God and then secondary in God's creation. I don't see any Muslims that would say that there's an essential reality outside of the God they serve, and obviously knowing that God is very important to them. In actual fact, my master's thesis, if anybody is willing to read a boring thesis, in my master's thesis, what I did is I look at this question of the ultimate reality in Islam. And I asked the question, I say, if the ultimate reality in Islam is Allah, the one and only, who's all-knowing, omnipresent, almighty, the creator of everything that exists independently of everything, what can we say is happening between the adherent, which is the Muslim, and Allah? And my thesis starts the following way. I describe, first of all, in the first chapter, what my delimitations are, But the second chapter, I look at what it means in Christianity when we speak about gnosis in a biblical context and what it means to know Yahweh. And then in the third chapter, I look at what it means when we know or have knowledge of Allah, ilm. And then in the fourth chapter, I look at the implications of that knowledge. And so in the fifth chapter, I discuss my findings of my research. And in the sixth chapter, I look at what other questions emerge from the study. But let me tell you what I quickly found. If Allah is the ultimate reality in Islam, Muslims have a problem because you cannot personally know Allah. There is a surah in chapter 112 in the Quran, and let me just get my study Quran. This is my study Quran, by the way. I read it every day like I do my Bible, and I've got little notes there. But there is a chapter in the Quran that starts off the following, and I'm going to quickly read it to you. It's from Surah 112. And it's Surah 112 that says the following. Say he, Allah is one, God the eternally sufficient unto himself. He begets not, nor was he begotten. Now, in Ayat, verse 4, the stinger for Muslims. And none is like unto him. Now, a lot of people actually translated that Allah, whatever you can conceive of Allah, he is not, because he's always other than what we conceive him to be. So I say to Muslims, okay, if Allah is the ultimate reality, and if Allah is the ground of knowing, if he's always other than what you conceive, you cannot really conceive about him because he's always other. If you say Allah is love, you say, no, 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 no. He attributes to himself love, and he can be loving towards his creation. Muslims will say Allah is al-wadud. It doesn't mean love. Not in the strongest sense like we see, for instance, when we say God is love in 1 John chapter 4. It means something very different. It means that Allah is loving towards, but he is not essentially that attribute. So Allah possessed these 99 attributes. If I move my laptop a little bit, there's all the 99 names of Allah. He possessed these attributes not intrinsically in himself. He attributes it to himself, but he's above them. Okay? Now there's a problem. First of all, you've got eternal, essential attributes that's a part of Allah, but it's not Allah. So that is polytheism. But anyway, I'm not going to go into that. What I want to say is basically what you have is you've got the eternal attributes of Allah, which essentially does not describe the inner reality of Allah's being, because he's above it. And whatever you conceive of Allah, if you say love, he's beyond it. Now, some of them will say, no, no, no. When we mean above, we mean greater than. So Allah is the greatest conceivable being, as Anselm of Canterbury said in the 10th century. Well, that's not what the sources say. When it speaks about the otherness of Allah, all the sources agree emphatically about the otherness of Allah. So whatever you conceive Allah to be as the ultimate reality, he is not. So I say, the ultimate end destination of the Muslim dahi looking for knowledge of Allah is agnosticism, because you cannot know him. You cannot seek him. You cannot know him personally the way the Christians do. So what do Christians do? Let's reflect quickly on that, because it will give us some perspective. John Frame wrote a beautiful book on systematic theology. I've got it here next to me. And in the book, he says, if we look at our God, which is obviously, and for the delimitation of the thesis, I describe the difference between Allah, which is the Muslim conception of God, and Yahweh, which is the Judeo-Christian conception of God. And Frame says the following. He says, love essentially reflects the essential character of God's being. If you want to know what the Christian God is like, the word love describes the essential necessity of who and what God is. So God is his attribute of love. Okay? He might have other prerogatives that flow from his love, but he's essentially love. So here's the thing. We can describe that love. We can say, well, if that love constitutes in and of itself something that we believe to be absolutely whole, then that love has to be triune, right? Because for that love to exist in its full extent, there has to be two eternal counterparts which reflect and lovingly reflects to each other before the creation of the world, to be loving. But there needs to be a third partner in that loving relationship to constitute that giving of the love, which is ultimately the expression of love. And it's interesting, there was a book written by Adam, I just finished it recently, who makes a case for divine love theory, where he looks at the doctrine of the Trinity, and he would say that it's only a triune reality and conception of a God that can adequately describe what it means when we speak about love. Any other form of love, in actual fact, is inept, because God, or let me say Allah, now has to create the world before the element of love is manifest in him. Because outside of him, nothing is known, nothing is seen, nothing penetrates him, nothing constitutes him. But the moment he creates, now these prerogatives exist in relation to his creation. So in a way, Allah leans upon his creation to make himself known, not the Christian God. The Christian God is intimately known. We call this in Latin Christianity the interpenetration of the interpersonal relationship of one another. We call it the perichoresis, or we would speak about the communicatum idiomatum, the mutual indwelling of the triune God, which completely consists and tells us exactly where we deduce our ultimate reality from. And that is so important. When I speak to Muslims, I always start with God, always start with their doctrine of God, because A lot of them want to jump to Jesus. A lot of them want to jump to Revelation. But before we get to that, let's talk about your conception of God. And let me say something. I've shown in my thesis quite conclusively that Muslims agree. You speak about Ibn Taymiyyah, you speak about Ibn Sina, Al-Fabri. I look at quite extensively. I look at Al-Ghazali, which is one of the best Muslim thinkers. And when they speak about the ultimate reality, which is constituted by their understanding and knowledge of Allah, they can cast a reflection and an understanding about his attributes, but they always say that he is beyond knowing. And this is very important for us to understand. How can you serve? How can you love? How can you have a relationship with something you cannot know? You cannot. It will not leave you to mystery. It will leave you, in actual fact, like I said, to agnosticism. And so that is quickly my argument, especially when we look at the ultimate reality in Islam.
And so, wow, that was really amazing. But what I want to ask is if so, I'll put your email address in the description. If people email you for resources, would they be able to have access to your thesis as well?
Yes, they're more than welcome,
Okay,
if they're
cool.
willing to read it.
Yeah. So if you guys want any PDFs or resources or want to read Pastor Rudolph's thesis, I'll put the email in the description. You can email him, ask him for what you want, and take it from there.
I will be thoroughly amazed if you do, because even my examiner said he does not want to read it again, which doesn't really tell me if it was a good thesis or a bad thesis. But anyway, I passed, so it must be good.
I think that the sad thing is, in terms of evangelizing to Muslims, there's not a lot of Muslim evangelists that focus on specifically on that. So yeah, hopefully this could inspire some people to aspire towards that as well. What is Islam's view on humanity?
It's very interesting because for a while I had a discussion with Ahmed Pandur. He wrote a book on sin and salvation in Christianity and Islam, and he looks specifically at the mercy of God in Islam and Christianity. And part of the question that I like to speak around is why did God take the cross? Why are we fearfully and wonderfully made, and why did God do what he did? But anyway, in Islam, human beings are seen as the pinnacle of God's creation. They are created with a sole purpose, and that sole purpose is to subjugate themselves to God, or Muslims will say to worship Allah and to do his will. Here's the thing though. They are not created sinless. Muslims will say, no, man is created sinless. He's born sinless. He's created, they will say, in a state of fitra, which is basically that he's inherently good. But they'll say that there's free will. Man has free will. Now, I'm telling you what the debaters tell me, right? They'll say, no, Muslims need to understand that man has free will, and he's accountable for his own actions, and therefore he's accountable on the day of judgment. All of the things I just described is the textbook answer of what you'll find when you read Muslim books. The unfortunate thing is the moment you start reading what is written in their literature, all of those are called in disrepute. And let me give you an example. When it comes to original sin in Islam, Muslims will say, no, you are created in a state of fitra. You don't have a negative disposition. You don't get to a place where you are, accountable for you are accountable for your deeds because, you've been created perfect, right? But now you've wandered away willfully. So you will need to give account for all these things. The problem is when you read the Quran, like I said, when I read this, it tells me that, yes, even though God created man in a state of fitra, the Quran speaks of man as being unjust, ungrateful, and this is Surah 14, Surah 80 as well speaks of that. It speaks in Surah 33 of man being absolutely unable to, in actual fact, it says he's foolish. but some translations say he's unable to fulfill God's commands. In Surah 70, it says that man is ultimately impatient. In Surah 4, it says that man is weak. In Surah 12:53, it says that man is created and inclined towards evil. That doesn't sound like man is created in this perfect state, okay? And there's a few other things as well. I think in Surah 24, it also says that man is unable to become pure by himself. So if you willfully decide to follow Allah correctly, you cannot be in a state of absolute redemption. You can't bring yourself to that. So what does it mean for humanity? Well, if you have this natural disposition to sin, then there's a problem. But when you read the Hadith, it makes it absolutely clear that by God's decree, by Allah's decree, that is, Allah have granted some people the ability to be good, but Allah also breathed into some people the ability to be evil. Now, if I can quickly read this in Surah 91, in Surah 91, in Ayat 6, I'm going to read. It says, by the earth and the one who spread it, this is God creating, and then by the soul and the one who fashioned it. And listen to this, and breathed into it its wickedness and its piety. So, what does it say? Allah is the one, according to Surah Al-Shams, that's chapter 91, the one that breathes into man that which is wickedness or that which is piety. Okay? So what does it mean? In this study Quran, it is said explicitly in the footnotes, and I'll take, so it's Sayyid Hossein Hussain that says it. He says explicitly, if you look at this verse I just read, it indicates clearly that God inspires some certain individuals and their soul to have a nature of evil or a nature of good to follow. So man is predetermined to be wicked or to be good. He cannot do anything else. So where's the freedom in that? And so if we speak of free will, that's not free will. And then if you read in the sources there at the back, I've got Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. If you read Sahih Muslim, and I've pulled up I just want to pull up the reference here. But listen to this. In Sahih Muslim, this is book 33, ayat number 6406. It says the following. Of course, it is someone which is predetermined for them to be and it was preordained for them. Therefore, he said, of course it happens as it's decreed by destiny and preordained for certain people. And this view is confirmed by the verse in the book of Allah, the exalted and the glorious. Consider the soul and him who made it perfect. Then he breathed into him sin or piety. Speaking of Surah Al-Shams, chapter 91, verse 7 and 8 that I just read. So, does man have this freedom or this perceived free will, as Muslims will say? Not according to their sources. According to their sources, they follow what was constituted by birth for them. And there's another interesting. If you read some of the hadith in Sahih Bukhari, there is interesting hadith. There's, for instance, the one where Moses or Adam. Yeah, no, Moses encounters Adam. Okay, and in paradise, and so Moses says to Adam, why did you fall? Why did you do what you did? And Adam answers him, well, how could I do any different than what Allah decreed? So Muslims are not free will theists as we believe. They're fatalists. They have to be, according to their sources. And so I did a debate a while back with Shabir Ali and Yusuf Ismail and Samuel Green as well. And I stuck to the point that the hadith and the teaching of what I find in the reading of the Quranic sources teaches us quite clearly that Allah is absolutely supreme. No one can transcend his will. And humans, even though they're God's creation, are not sinless. And even though they are assumedly created in a state of fitra or inherently goodness, they deviate from it. They can't do anything else because Allah has created them to do what they are doing. So if man finds himself in his sinfulness, he can say, like Adam did, how could I do anything else? Allah have decreed for me to do that, and therefore I've done it. So yeah, I hope it adequately answers your question on
It does.
Islam's view of humanity.
It does. It brought, yeah. No, it does, and it was interesting. It brought up a lot of other questions, but I don't think we'll have time to go into them. Then it also brought up some questions with regards to some Christian doctrines, but I'll ask you that after the recording. Don't worry about that.
Sure.
What are some of the consequences of the ideas of Islam? Because on specifically why I started this podcast was because of this thing that ideas have consequences, and I was really vexed by like the wokeism and what's going on in not only in America but how it's been boiling over to South Africa or as well. So, what are some of the consequences of the Muslim ideas?
Yeah, I would say for the Muslims globally, there's definitely they deduce whatever they see in their traditions and in the Quran and translate it into what we know as Sharia law. So Sharia law basically gives an adequate outline of what is acceptable in social structures, what should happen in family life, what the role of women is in Islam, what the roles of men is in Islam, what some of the economic practices are. You know, they've got their own banking system that charges a specific amount, which you know, some of these things are. If you ask what the immediate implications are of the Islamic ideas, I would say some of them are very positive. You know, I know there's a lot of people that say, no, you know, when Sharia law is constituted, we will be dhimmis, we will be oppressed, and basically we will have to pay jizya, which is a form of tax for their protection. And that's true. That is absolutely true. There's two good books by Batyor and the other one by Mark Dury that looks at dhimitude and what it means. So if you're a Muslim and you're in the house of Islam, you are protected, you are looked after socially. You know, we can learn a lot from what Muslims give in zakat. They give it as a religious obligation to the poor, to the needy. Most of the feeding schemes in Africa is Muslims. ERA has been in. I follow a Muslim website, and it's a Muslim group called ERA, and ERA is busy flooding Uganda and certain other countries with food, and as a result, people convert to Islam because the effects of Islam immediately betters the life of those individual people that really have need. But that is where it stays. If you reflect on the Western world, if you look at the banking system, if you look at the cultural norm, if you look at family life, if you look at the role of women, if you look at free economical practices, etc., in the West, it's almost vicariously opposite to what we find in Islam. Very interesting. And I would say that one of the cultural consequences of Islamic ideas that is making a lot of people nervous is Sharia law. A lot of people will say, like I said, if we live under Sharia law, for instance, homosexuality, in a Sharia state, homosexuals will be executed. I'm just saying it as it is. Under
It's
Sharia
like,
law. Sorry. Yes.
So I want to say it's like that. I don't know if you're familiar with the political pundit in America, Dave Rubin. He's homosexual himself, but he is a conservative politically, and he said that queers for Palestine is not the same thing as Palestine for queers.
Yeah, for sure. He's absolutely right. No, they won't make it in yeah, they won't make it in 2 seconds. Let's say it like that. But um, yeah, the rights of women. Um, even though we need to say historically, when Muhammad arrived on the scene, he did better the life in the time. He bettered the life of women, and it's a positive thing that we need to. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, he says women are the greater portion of hell." He says women are stupid, and he says all these negative things about women. Yes, he does, but in the immediate context of Islam, when Muhammad set out to preach his gospel, he bettered the life of women immediately by including them, by giving them certain rights which they never had in that setting before.
Oh wow.
So in that setting, these things are positive, specifically in Islam. And one of the things that really bother me, and I'll talk about really bother me, is the absolute, um, you know, for lack of a better word, um, the alarmist narrative where people say, "Oh, you know what? You shouldn't eat halal foods because it's being paid to this thing, and Muslims are trying to subjugate us, and all
Oh
of
wow.
these things." Yeah, Muslims in South Africa, especially, are not really interested in it. They're not really interested in any way or form um, to unfortunately afford themselves money because of Sharia law. It's more a thing of submission to what God has said and following what Allah has constituted. Um, but as for the Western mind, and as for the Muslim mind, some of the principles to its very core in secularism and in Islam is vicariously opposed to each other. What about Christianity? Well, in Christianity, obviously, there's a wonderful book written by James D. Kennedy that actually asks a question: um, what would the world look like if Jesus never came? Okay, and then he looks at how churches established hospitals, universities, um, certain economic practices, and so Christianity, in actual fact, according to his study, had a huge impact on the way the world think and the Western world function. But we can't say today anymore that the Western world is Christian.
Hmm.
It's influenced by those principles, but it's been secularized since when? Very early on, I would say, even with the before the 17th century, we already start seeing an absolute rapid decline in what is known as progressive thinking, and the death of the Christian God later on, and secularism becoming the predominant ideology that secularists want to live by. But now, like Richard Dawkins, they want to stand up and say, "No, I'm culturally a Christian, but I don't believe in all those mumbo jumbo. But culturally, you can't have your cake and eat it too. There's certain things which
Yeah.
are deeply connected to the Christian sentiment and the life of scriptures." So, yeah, very interesting. I hope I answered you.
Is it because of the friction between the core fundamental belief of Islam and what we find in the Western world? Is that kind of what we see happening in the UK at the moment?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And here's the thing: through natural birth, people in UK have one child, maybe. So the natural birth rate of Christian, let's say Christian for lack of a better word, the Christian world have one child, two children, where Muslims have three wives, 12 children by each wife. I'm just giving an example. There's proper statistics actually on what's the website? It's not Barna, it's the other one. I can't remember the website's name. Peer review. Is it peer review? A website that looks at the statistics of the natural birth rate, for instance, in a country like the UK, and Christians, and they they are breeding us out of our own homes,
Mm.
and that is in a way part of the strategy, isn't it? Is if we have more children, obviously in future, it's our children that will rule, reign, and be in office and do certain things, and therefore there will be the slow takeover from generation to generation. I won't say, because I work with certain missionaries, but there's certain European countries that if things keep on going the way it does currently, those countries will be declared Muslim countries in the next 20 to 30 years. And I'm talking about very strong European countries, with exception of one country in Europe, and that's Poland. The Poles just took an absolute stance against immigrants and against Muslims. But some of these guys, they arrive in certain places and they establish themselves. They get legal access to, the basic needs, and they stick around and have a few families. And in, like I said, a few years from now, in certain countries, they'll take over. What do you think is the biggest denomination in Germany? Denomination in Germany.
Christian denomination.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but because I feel like there's a catch to the question. I heard something in a previous one of my previous guests mentioned, and I said I was going to definitely ask you about it. Is it Chrislam?
No, there's not a merger of Chrislam. In actual fact, Chrislam is for the greater part vilified, because a lot of people see that cultural Islam is too close to confessional Islam, and therefore the two cannot coexist. And so with Chrislam, you've got all of these individual Christians that think they can still dress Muslim, they can still eat Muslim, they can still pray even in mosques, and just simply confess Jesus as Lord in their inner rooms and believe the doctrine of the Trinity. That doesn't really sound like Christianity, does it? It really is just a weird thing. But let me tell you, the biggest denomination in Germany currently is the Jehovah's Witnesses. That's the biggest denomination. So if somebody's speaking, if the Lord is speaking to somebody to go to Germany, there's great work needed in Germany. But anyway, the reason I'm saying that is Jehovah's Witnesses, their arguments against the doctrine of the Trinity and the divinity of Christ is exactly the same than Muslims. If you educate yourself surrounding the normal objections that Muslims have, it's almost very similar to what you'll find in normal cults like the Jehovah's Witnesses. Even this cult in Pretoria, they come out as if they're making new arguments. They make exactly the same arguments that Anthony Buzzard and Dale Tuggy and those guys make. And we are very familiar with biblical Unitarianism for the last few years. Exactly the same arguments. So I would say if you deal with Islam and Muslims, you'll encounter exactly the same resistance and exactly the same arguments that you find, for instance, from Jehovah's Witnesses in Germany, which is very interesting, right? So you actually, if you train yourself to answer these questions, you can kill two birds with one stone. So if you love to witness to Muslims, the same arguments will work for people that are in the cult of the Jehovah's Witnesses, Joseph Smith. So yeah, it's very interesting.
That is interesting. For the sake of time, I'm going to go over to the next question. So in the social Marxist theories that we see today, we have kind of this matrix that some people are oppressed and other people are the oppressors. And within that matrix, Christianity is kind of portrayed as the oppressors, and Islam is kind of grouped with the victims, the oppressed. Is that truly the case, that we can call Islam victims?
I've never, let me say it like this. The only place I saw where Muslims counted themselves as being unfairly treated is recently on Piers Morgan, where a group of Muslims would go on his show, and he would ask very difficult questions surrounding their beliefs, surrounding how Muslim extremism affects the West, etc., etc. Afterwards, a lot of Muslims would then say, what we were very unfairly treated. There's a medical doctor, a Muslim medical doctor that was on Piers Morgan, and I'm not saying the guy's not guilty, but he had ties to certain extremist groups in the UK. And Piers Morgan asked, he said, how can you be a medical doctor in the UK, but your sentiment is to hate us as the West? How can you treat people fairly in accordance with your medical creed, but yet you plan to be intentively violent against us? And so, as far as I understood, there was implications for that imam. He was not allowed to practice medicine anymore as a result of that show, and I think they put him out of the country, as far as I remember and recall. I think a lot of Muslims feel that in Western countries they are not well portrayed. Muslims will say, if I speak to Muslims in South Africa, they would, for instance, say the greatest victims currently in the world is Palestinians. Okay, that is in an unfair war against the West, or against Israel. That is the two places you hear the outcry most. And if you speak to any form of Muslim activist, you will see that it's always about Palestine. We had a few friends in Cape Town that one day pitched with Israeli flags, and they just wanted to pray for Palestine and Israel. And there was a group with Palestinian flags, and there was a huge fight because the Palestinians saw this as an absolute, revolt against the oppression of the Palestinian people, and they attacked these people. So these people wanted to pray, a good group of Christians, and because they had a Jewish flag, they got a hiding. And I know one of the guys, he's with me at the seminary. It didn't turn out well for them. So yes, there's certain people that feel that the general sentiment of the West is plotted against them, and especially somebody like Palestine, because of Israeli influence, you could say, and because of the political alignment that a country like, for instance, America has with the Israelis. That is the only thing I can say. As for Western liberalism, secularism, if you look specifically at the cultural Marxist perspective, as far as I know, Muslims also speak out against that and the dangers of that. I think part of the Sapient Institute, which is another Muslim organization, they had a whole conference that focused on social Marxism and the dangers of the new wokeism. So they were against it. And these are guys, like I said, that speak on Piers Morgan, and they've got a great influence. And they're also scared. They also share in certain religious sentiments. They're also scared of transvestites teaching our children. They're also concerned about binary gender issues, body dysmorphic issues. Very much. I can speak, if I sit on a panel and I speak with some of my Muslim friends. One is a medical doctor. His concerns concerning puberty blockers and allowing children to have abortions in school without the consent of their parents or their parents knowing, all of those things he's equally concerned about and he's against. And he says, if we ever have there's a guy that I know very well, right? So he's a medical doctor. He's an excellent doctor, and he speaks on these things with great clarity and sensitivity and authority. And he would say, Tawreetsa, I want to speak with him and show that the Muslims affirm what he's saying. So yes, the general sentiment, I would say, is absolutely against that. Even though Muslims will also say that the depravity in the West and what we see as perceived freedoms in the West concerning pornography, the free world exploitation of the economy and the poor, etc., is all abhorrent. And for them, they look at the West as being Christian. They don't look at the West as a separate entity from Christianity. For them, Western world equates to Christianity and the Christian world. And I always have to remind them, America is a long time ago not a Christian nation anymore. They might live by certain perceived Christian ideologies, but it's definitely, a friend of mine, my brother's currently in America, and him and a friend of his that are there, said America is not even secularist anymore. It's currently pagan. Which is scary. It's just absolutely pagan. It's absolutely even the youngsters at university. My brother's at Regent University in America, and his friend of mine as well. He's actually a head of department of one of the departments there. And they say straight out, we're not dealing with, if we look at the Western culture, especially America, we're not dealing with a secularist perspective anymore. We're dealing with a pagan one. That's how far the sentiment has gone. So yeah, if Jesus is calling anybody to go to America to minister to Americans, you guys are welcome to go. I will never go. I love South African and scarp chops too much.
Yeah, same. So then, before I go on to the next question, based upon what you said, so Muslim extremism is not a thing really in South Africa. Do I understand you correctly?
Well, let me say it like this. This is very interesting because we've got, for instance, in Cape Town, Pagat. Pagat killed Rashid Stahi and certain drug dealers in Cape Town. And they also bombed the, what's that, Rock Cafe?
Hard Rock.
That's American. Hard Rock Cafe. They bombed it in the early 90s. So if you say we've not seen the level of extremism that we see all over the world, I would say it's definitely not as frequent as what we see in all of the world. But do not be fooled. If you mess around with certain Muslims in Cape Town, they'll take you out. They don't take nonsense. They, as part of their religious duty, they will take what action is necessary for them to get done what they do. That being said, they make the best of neighbors in normal communities. I say this with greatest of respect. They look after their businesses. With the recent strikes we had in KwaZulu-Natal, where people looted shops and so forth, they stood by all businesses in a complex, and they would protect some of the people who weren't Muslim. And so, I believe there's obviously security companies and Christians that have done the same for Muslim businesses. But it's something that we in South Africa are very fortunate and blessed. We don't have that extremism. Is it close to us? The northern part of Mozambique currently is occupied by a Muslim extremist group, which we should be very concerned about. They've got more of a military structure than what the South African Defence Force can handle, which means that if they want to pick a fight and come across the border and do something, they can. We don't have the infrastructure or the army to deal with them. That's just the truth. And that's a fact.
Scary.
They took that petroleum company over, and they're very strong and they're very militant. That being said, in the northern parts of Africa, as you go higher into Africa, what do we see in Muslim extremism there? Lots, plenty. The story of Christians in Nigeria and Algeria and some of these countries like Somalia is very different than what we experience in South Africa. There's Muslim extremism. Christians are put in churches. The churches are set alight. People are killed for their faith. People are killed every single day because of their confessions. In Nigeria recently, there was a school that was raided by one of the extremist groups, and they took all the little girls hostage, and they're still gone. So God help us. And it was a Christian school. So yeah, these things in Africa is definitely evident, and it takes place. I always ask my Muslim friends, though, why do they do it? And they will say, well, it's a question of interpretation, right? They take the sources that they read, and they interpret and apply them wrongfully to justify what they are doing. That's what Muslims say. I say, no, they've got a foot to stand on because they look at the life and the sentiment and what Muhammad did as the prophet, and they justify what they do. And it's a very difficult case to make outside of Islam, to say we are going to be pacifist, because Islam in and of itself, by its very nature, is not a pacifist religion. I would even contend, and this might be a little bit controversial, but I would say Christianity is also not a pacifist religion. I know a lot of people say turn the other cheek, but I mean,
They
that's simply not
misunderstand what that
historically.
means.
Exactly. And it's simply not the sentiment of what we see in Old and New Testament. So yes, do we have reason for concern in South Africa? Not at this stage. We don't have reason for concern in South Africa concerning extremism. Europe is currently, I would say, influxed by numerous immigrants, and we thought extremism would be more, right, but it's not, because there's now an integration and a settlement of these people, and they integrate themselves in these nations. And there's another problem. There's a religious foothold that these individuals will have in those countries that were perceived early on as or secularist or Christian countries. And like I said, there's some European countries currently, if things keep on going the way it does, they will become Muslim countries. There'll be a green flag raised with the moon and the crescent very soon if those guys persist in what they're doing. So China and Poland, the other country is China, that absolutely just decimates Islam, and if they preach, they put them in jail, but they do the same to Christians as well.
Yeah, China is a different animal with
They're
different things to speak about.
No, they're not our Chinas.
No. For if there's anybody in our audience that is outside of Africa, that is like a South African slang for a friend.
Yeah.
Then last question before we end off, Pastor Rudolph, is what would you say are the most important things that Christians should be aware of concerning Islam?
First of all, something that really bothers me is that Muslims are being trained to answer Christians and to witness to Christians. At this stage, the reason I moved to KwaZulu-Natal is in Johannesburg, I worked roughly with about 4 Muslim agencies that did dawah work. Now, dawah work is, like we would say, biblical evangelism. You would go onto the streets, you'll hand out little leaflets, you'll engage people in conversation, you'll bring them to Christianity, you'll pray for them, you'll follow up, you'll bring them into the fold, whatever need there is, you'll help. You know biblical evangelism. Muslims are currently in South Africa doing large quantities of dawah and evangelism. And here's the thing, they are being trained to answer you as a Christian. If you go to the Muslim, I'm close to the IPCI, and you guys can go have a look. Just type in IPCI. You'll see that's the Islamic Propagation Center International in Durban. And you can look at their lectures. Their lectures are online, how they train their people to go to Christians. And so be very aware of that. I went to 2 places. I went to Lenasia and I went to Cape Town. When I went to Cape Town, I was shocked. I did a debate there with Adnan Rashid. The first debate we did, he conceded. So there's no recording of it because in 5 minutes of the conversation, he already conceded the debate, which is wonderful for me. But anyway, then we just did Q&A, and there was the people that was in the audience, in actual fact, was white people, white Afrikaans. I used to be in the AFM. I used to be in the Dutch Reformed Church. I used to be in the Lede en Christus. These people have reverted to Islam because Muslims have caught them. Muslims have taken care of them. Muslims have taken them and led them to Islam. And where the church was deficient in helping these individual people, these white aunties stand there in Afrikaans and tell me why Muhammad is the prophet of our time. That's scary, man. I went into Lenasia and there was about 7 white Afrikaan Boersians. And they all sat there and told me their background. This one was from the AFM. That one was from Dutch Reformed. This one was from this church and that church, and why they're now Muslims. I gave the Quran away. I could have shown you, but there was recently about 40,000 Afrikaans Qurans print by Saad Becker. Saad Becker is the translator of the Quran in Cape Town. And they have a plan for white Afrikaners in South Africa. They want to win specifically white Afrikaners in South Africa. And they're ready. These little booklets, I didn't finish the story. That young man that sat in the beginning and he had this little booklet, and he asked me the questions from, was a Muslim resource from Ahmed Didat. They've got numerous resources downloadable for free from the IPCI website, where you can download these resources to use against Christians. Where's our resources? How do we train our people? You know, if you go to a mosque on a Thursday night, you go and there's a guy with 2 chairs and he schools people how to ask questions. Now the Christian is going to say Jesus is this, this, and this. How do you answer him? And then he tells them how to answer. They train their people with a military precision. They've got a desire to see their people trained. You know what we do in churches? We sing the newest Hillsong, and then we eat muffins afterward. And next Sunday, we've already forgotten what the pastor preached on the previous Sunday. That's what we. I'm not being critical, but being intentional about evangelism is key for us and the survival of our future and our children. I'm telling you now.
Yeah, and it's like that's one of my pet peeves. What is going on in the church? Like, I worked for a pastor, and he outrightly told me he doesn't see the need for apologetics, and I was like, it would have been unwise for me to, with that specific pastor, to engage with him, but I was just like in my mind like, wow, I can't believe what I'm hearing.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah,
I can understand that sentiment, and the reason they don't have a need for apologetics is because they don't evangelize. Because you think about it, if you're on the street, right, you need to give answers because people ask difficult questions. You know, I love watching discussions on street. There's a guy that was on YouTube for a while, and I used to watch all his stuff. He was a black African American guy. I can't remember his name. I think it's David. And yeah, just David. And I can't remember his surname. But you know what? He would take people. You'd be a street preacher, and he'll have a mic, and he'll say to people, "Say your say," and he'll give people the mic. And there will just be this woman that says, "How could God allow for my baby to die?" And it's a sincere question. And David would take the mic, and he would give her not just a good apologetic answer on suffering and pain, but he would also give her a very good pastoral answer on, you know, hey, I see your pain. But here's why we've got fallenness, and here's why we've got these things in this world. And so I've got great appreciation. Apologetics complements our evangelical witness. I know a lot of people want to do apologetics because they like to fight. I had a few. I teach Islam at university level. Okay, I've been in a seminary for years, and 2 of the most popular courses, especially for young men, was apologetics, where they teach them, well, we taught them apologetics, how to defend the faith, but also polemics on how to skillfully dismantle the argument of someone else. And people love that because it was confrontational and it was sharp. You know, you need to know your arguments so you can quickly measure who is the sharpest biscuit in the box. And the sad thing is, you know, I've never seen a good argument convince any Muslim. I've seen love convince them. It's good to have a good argument. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a good argument, but it's more than that, right? So apologetics is great, but it aids evangelism. And sometimes it just defends the faith. It defends the flock. You know, if somebody comes in church and they say, "Oh, Jesus was not God. I had this revelation," then you need to say, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's see what the word says," and then apologetically you can engage with that. But yes, you're absolutely right. I agree with you that I'm very concerned, especially in the South African church, what's happening. I was set to speak at a conference in October at a church in Johannesburg. I'll just say that because if I say the church, the guy will know it is. But the sad reality of that church is the church is solely based and built upon entertainment. So you come to church, there's people in the car park with little signs, and they give you a chocolate. Oh, you're first-time visitor. They get your details. They give you a chocolate. They show you to your seat. You get to your seat. They bring you a nice hot coffee afterwards. You know, they've got this whole thing. The worship is so entertaining. You know, the lights are dimmed because they don't want to embarrass people. They don't use the word sin. The guy said it straight from the pulpit. Don't use the word sin because there's a negative, you know, ambiance that you create. I'm like, bro, you should preach on sin every Sunday. Don't know about you, but it's still popular. People are still sinning, but no, we don't preach on sin. It's too negative, we leave that to I'm going, God help us. So yes, we've got a lot of work to do, but with that, I need to say that Christ will build his church. That's the promise we've received, right? And the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So it doesn't matter what happened, Christ still prevails. And that is the most important thing to keep in mind.
Amen. And I think that is a really good place to end off. Time caught up with us. And as I said earlier, if you guys want any resources, I'll link Boss Rudolph's email address in the description, and you are more than welcome to please do message him, because we do need more people loving Muslims, loving them to Christ. And that had an impact on me as well. Thank you for today's episode. I really enjoyed it and appreciated it.
It's my absolute pleasure, and I'll send it to you, my email in the chat.
Perfect.
There we go. It's in a private chat, though.
Oh, okay. Did you send it to me on WhatsApp? Oh, no, I see. Yeah, send it to me on WhatsApp. Then that's easier.
Okay, cool. I'll do so.
Cool. But for the rest of you, yeah?
Sorry, no, I said thanks for allowing me to speak. And I pray dearly that God will awaken somebody through this conversation to go love on not just a Muslim, but somebody that's in a cult, somebody that's even lost. Take that chance. Speak to them. There's nothing that motivates you more to learn about biblical doctrine than to speak to somebody about Jesus, because they've got questions. At the moment somebody says, but why do you believe Jesus and not Buddha or not you? Now you're in apologetics. Now you're gonna answer these questions, and you're gonna serve that individual by doing the work. Go for it, guys. I'm sending you the email.
Thank you very much. It was an absolute privilege. To those of you, thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for watching and or listening to Hey Culture, a podcast that wants to shine a light in the darkness. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, share, and ring that notification bell. On Apple and Spotify, please review and rate this podcast. I'm René Fermor, and this is Hey Culture.